In your introduction, you addressed the often made statement that St. Paul was like a convert to Christianity, and many Islamic polemicists regard Paul with suspicion and claim he never knew Jesus and kind of founded his own religion. But you emphatically state that that's like not the case. Could you give a small exposition of that and why you thought it was important to put in your introduction?
Right. I think getting what happens with St. Paul on the road to Damascus right touches on a whole lot of what I'm going to be doing in the rest of the book. That's why I put it up front in the introduction. It seems almost obvious when you narrow in on it that, you know, St. Paul is on the road to Damascus in AD 35. And in AD 35, there were not two separate religions, Judaism and Christianity, right? that existed as these two independent entities where someone could convert from one to the other, right? And that's not the way that St. Paul talks about his own conversion. When he talks about it, when St. Luke narrates it, and then St. Luke describes St. Paul narrating it in a speech in the book of Acts, and then also when St. Paul addresses it in Galatians. That's not how he describes it as a conversion. We get the conversion idea by way of St. Augustine and Martin Luther, who both very deeply, you know, they had a conversion experience of different sorts in the two cases, and then they identified very strongly with St. Paul and sort of read their experience back into him. But when St. Paul describes it, he deliberately lifts terminology from like the prophetic call of Jeremiah. He uses the exact wording, right? Regarding being set apart from his mother's womb, being called to be the apostle, in Jeremiah's case, the prophet to the nations. He draws on all of that language. And so he frames what happens to him on the road to Damascus as the same thing that happened to Isaiah when he saw the God of Israel enthroned in the temple, and Ezekiel when he saw God on his throne, and Jeremiah when he was called as a prophet. And that idea that there aren't sort of these two different religions, Judaism and Christianity, is contained in there. The idea that St. Paul doesn't see himself as like, oh, I'm now going out and starting a new religion, right? He doesn't describe it like Joseph Smith describes finding the golden plates, right? He describes it as, you know, I'm called to be a prophet in the same way that these others were, right? I'm in this tradition, firmly entrenched in this tradition. And so this sets up one of the main themes of the book, which is that the apostles were the inheritor of this religion that was already on the ground, existed in progress, right? And saw themselves within that, not that they were creating and starting anything new. And this is one of the pieces where after we started talking and I reflected on it, I realized this kind of rubs up against a lot of Islamic apologetics really directly. I remember, I won't name him, but I remember watching a certain Protestant apologist debating an Islamic scholar about St. Paul and his role in creating Christianity. And the Islamic scholar framed his whole argument around whether or not basically Boulos was a Rasul. Right, whether he qualified, right, as a Rasul, and the Protestant apologist literally didn't understand what he was arguing. He was literally standing there going, "What does that have to do with anything?" Right? Like complete failure to engage because he didn't understand St. Paul in that prophetic context.
Yeah,
right. He understood. He had this other, by way of Luther, conversion narrative, right, for St. Paul that he was working with, and he didn't see the connection there. So that is the reason the church in the Arabic language. You know, I'm at an Antiochian church, so in the Arabic language has sort of expressed who St. Paul is in that way, is because the church has had this more original understanding of St. Paul as being someone called to this prophetic purpose.
Yeah. So Paul sees himself as just having a revelation, and he's continuing in the religion that he was already in, basically.
Right. The same way that Jeremiah was called to this particular role in his particular time and place as the exile is happening, or the prophet Isaiah as, the northern kingdom is falling. He's called now as the gospel is going out to the nations.